as will our one with Senator Bice later today. Tomorrow, Wednesday, we have Democratic Senate candidate Abby Broyles, and on Thursday, Republican U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe. Again, those will be on oklahoman.com and our YouTube channel at some point after they air. Senator, thanks so much for coming in. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Can't believe it's 3 weeks to go. It's been a marathon and a sprint, right? I mean, you announced, I think, in April of 19, is that right? And,
April 24th of 19, that's right.
So there's the marathon part. Now
Yep.
you got to find that kick, that last kick to finish this race.
3 weeks, 21 days. You know, it has been an interesting journey, announcing last April and then going through the beginning of this year, and then COVID sort of put a screeching halt to
I was going to ask you, what has it been
campaigns.
like to campaign in the age of COVID? You've run 2 state Senate campaigns, which are pretty big campaigns, big districts. So what's this been like?
It's different. I think that for me, the campaign was then cut into chunks. We really hit the pause button back in March when COVID presented itself and things began to shut down in Oklahoma. So from middle of March to really beginning of May, we really didn't do much from the campaign side because we were really focused on making sure that we were being cautious with what was happening. And so that made it unique in that when things began to slowly reopen in May, you had really May and June before the primary election.
Right.
And then you had the primary, and then you had July and August to run that runoff election. So it was almost broken up into chunks these last couple of elections.
You guys were pretty active even, in those, maybe not in the spring of 2019, but later, fall of 2019, I went to, I think, 3 or 4 forums that some of you appeared at. So you really have been campaigning for quite a while.
Yeah, we had been holding various events across the district, and when COVID hit, we decided certainly to pull back. We knew that there was some challenges there, and I was focused on the state Senate side, making sure that constituents were getting out good information.
In session, that's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we were putting out a lot of information, talking to folks about unemployment issues and how to apply for that. But then also we had to really make sure that we were doing enough voter contact on the campaign side, and so we used technology to our advantage. We started doing Facebook town halls, we did Facebook Live, we did some Zoom calls. I had a couple of folks that wanted to do a Zoom meet and greet, and so I never would have thought that we'd be using Zoom in a congressional campaign the way that we have over the last several months, but it was effective, and it got people that aren't comfortable or want to be cautious about getting out the opportunity to sit and listen to my hopes for the future, and also ask questions about what they want to see in a congressional candidate. It worked out really well.
Good. Well, we'll definitely get back to coronavirus, but I wanted to let you talk a little bit about yourself. I know that you're local. You're born in Oklahoma City, 1973. Tell me about where you grew up, what part of the city you're from.
So I was born and raised in the Oklahoma City metro area. I North OKC, went to Rollingwood Elementary School, and graduated from Putnam City Original, which is the Pirates. My parents were divorced when I was young, and my mom got remarried to a really great guy. My mom and stepdad have, my brother and sister are quite a bit younger than I am. So my family is all here locally with the exception of my dad. My dad actually now lives in Florida. And it was a tough upbringing in some ways. My mom at one point was a single mom trying to put food on the table, and that made it
how many siblings at that time?
Well, at the time I was an only child before my mom got remarried, and so she was trying to take care of me and make sure that there was food on the table. And so I think that's one of the things that I think about when I'm looking at legislation or talking about issues with families is I know what it's like to struggle, and what it's like to be a single mom working, trying to provide for a family.
Yeah.
So went to Putnam City Original, graduated from there. I often say when I'm giving campaign speeches that the school colors for PCO are orange and black.
Oh, so that's why you chose that.
So I stuck with them, and I went north to Oklahoma State, even though my entire family are diehard OU fans.
And you're wearing OU red.
I sort of am wearing OU red. Well, I think this is red, not crimson,
Okay.
right? Okay. But yeah, I thought this is the place for me. So I went north to Stillwater, and my major was marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I always knew that I wanted to be in sales and marketing in some capacity. So that was my path. And my junior year, I met a guy. And we started dating, and we'll be married 25 years.
Congratulations.
Actually, in January, and it's been a great journey ever since.
And while you were in college, I mean, what sort of activities, kind of outside class things? Were you interested in student government? Did you?
No, I was never really engaged in politics other than voting in every election, and when I was 18 years old, I registered as a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
I was involved. I was a member of Alpha Chi Omega sorority, so shout out to my sorority sisters out there. And very involved in that. I held various leadership positions within the House, and that kept me really busy. But school was my focus.
Yeah.
And I've graduated in 4 years in a summer. And one of the things that I share when we're talking about, you hear a lot about education, higher education and tuition and loans. My father was able to pay for my first 2 years of college.
Mm-hmm.
And after my sophomore year, he called and said, "Hey, I need to tell you that I'm out of money and I can't pay for school anymore."
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to figure out, how do I finish college? I was the first one to graduate from college in my family, and I knew it was important because it would give me a leg up. So I went back to Stillwater, trucked over to the financial aid office, asked for an application, filled out student loan papers, got myself a job, and I put myself through school. Finished the last 2 years and a couple summer classes.
Yeah, a lot of us did that same thing. Of course, I tell people the most that I can remember paying per hour in tuition was $30, and people, it's laughable. I mean, what I've paid for my kids, it'd be like 1 year was all four. So
I remember I took out 2 loans that were $5,500 a piece for my junior and senior year, and that's all you could take out. That was the maximum. And then I had to pay for the rest. But I had $11,000 in student loans when I left Oklahoma State, and I took my time paying them off. But it was worth it.
Yeah, that would be actually a pittance compared to what some get out with now. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So, did you find a job right away when you came back? Did you come back to Oklahoma City? Is that?
I did. Yes, came back to Oklahoma City. At that time, I was engaged. Jeff and I were planning a wedding, and I came back and started working at a call center for Southwestern Bell Wireless at the time, and worked there for a couple of years. And then I got into the sales side of things, and I did sales for 15 years before. I was given the opportunity to work for my father's business. He started a technology company in New York in the mid-90s. And about 2004, after the birth of our second daughter, he gave me the opportunity to work remote, which was great.
Trying
to juggle.
Ahead of the curve.
Yeah, right. Trying to juggle kiddos and a work-life balance. So went to work for him, and over the next several years, I did pretty much every job that you can imagine in the business.
That would have been right there with kind of the tech boom, right?
That's exactly right. So I was doing, I was in the marketing space. I started doing digital marketing for the company at one point, but I also did sales. I did purchasing. And then in 2008, my dad called one day and he said, "We have a problem." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, our controller at the time had been using the line of credit to essentially pay operating expenses for the business. And the line of credit had been exhausted and we had no cash flow." And he said, "I need you to take over the finances while I figure out how we're going to get out of this." And I said, "Hey, Dad, I'm a marketing major, And he said, "I know, but I know you can do this." And so I did.
You had to have taken some accounting and finance.
I did take some, basic accounting classes. So I ended up taking over the finances, and it's a blessing. But that company is still thriving today.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
But my dad jokes with me that I got a real world MBA. I didn't need to go to grad school.
That's true. I mean, if you were handling that range of activities at a small company, that really would have been the case.
Yeah, I think as a small business owner that you really do everything. You're a jack of all trades, and I certainly was in that business. And I took that experience and ended up starting my own company, doing digital marketing and consulting work for companies.
And that was here in Oklahoma City,
It
right?
was.
Yeah. Well, and were you doing that when you first decided to run for the Senate?
I was.
And how did that come about? I mean, here you've been involved in business all this time, and your engagement with politics was mainly to vote, I guess. What was it? I mean, was there some kind of moment where you go, I've got to get involved because this is a problem?
Well, someone asked.
Okay.
And what I found out since I've been elected is that oftentimes women do have to be asked to run. I think for some reason we don't see ourselves in those positions. We see ourselves in leadership positions in other ways, whether it's through our faith community or nonprofit community, but we don't really envision the opportunity to serve in a legislative capacity.
Although at this time, Fallon you would have had a woman governor at
Correct.
this point. Yeah.
That's correct. The sitting senator at the time, he called me one day and said, I'm not running for re-election and you should consider running for my Senate seat. And I said, I don't know the first thing about running for office. I've never thought about it, but tell me more. And he was a great resource for me. And very quickly, I think I decided, you know what, I could make a difference for Oklahoma. And I also thought it was a great opportunity for me to really show my daughters not to be afraid to do something big and bold and outside the box.
Right. And how old would they have been when you?
They were 9 and 12. And funny story about that, after my husband and I had had lots of conversations and he was very supportive, I wanted to tell my girls, what I was about to embark on and what it looked like running for a public office. So my oldest daughter, who was 12, we were in the car one afternoon and I said, Isabella, I want to share with you something that I'm going to be doing over the next several months. And I sort of laid out, what it would look like and what I would have to do, and that I may be gone a few nights a week, knocking doors and campaigning. And I remember vividly sitting in the car, and after I explained it all, I asked her, I said, what do you think about that? And she sat for a moment and pondered, and she looked up at me and she said, why not? And I thought it was
the wisdom of children.
I mean,
they can just put it so
simply. I thought that was pretty amazing that the 12-year-old,
Yeah.
sort of thought, well, why would you not do this? Why not take a chance? And so I did.
What's just quickly, what's it like for them to see, because of those state races, you wouldn't have been hammered by Club for Growth or the DCCC or whoever it might be. What's it like for them in this campaign to have seen this barrage of anti-Bice ads?
It's challenging sometimes. Our oldest daughter is away at college, so I think in some ways she's a little bit insulated from the everyday ads that you see. She's not watching television. I don't know how many people are watching a lot of television. It seems like the young people these days are watching a lot of Netflix or Amazon. Right. So she may not see it as much, but my younger daughter does. And she's also a little bit interested in politics, which my husband says, well, that's your doing, dear. But she takes it in stride. I think my husband is the one that probably takes it the hardest. When you see mail pieces, you mentioned Club for Growth. When you see a mail piece coming to your door that, calls your wife a liar, or says that she's, doing things for the wrong reasons, I think that can be really tough on a spouse. He had to get off of social media for a while back because it's just tough. But my younger daughter, I think she's got thick skin, probably like her mom, and she just kind of lets it roll off of her and says, I know the truth, and that's not going to dissuade us. So
I assume they were all supportive of you making this race too, even though it might mean weeks away at a time, depending on what your schedule is Sunday through Thursday. It's normally Congress members either leave on a Sunday night or Monday morning. They're usually back on Thursday night or Friday morning.
And that's really similar to the legislative calendar here, right?
Right.
I'm fortunate that I represent a district that's 20 minutes outside of Oklahoma City. So when I ran, I was able to still drop my daughters off at school in the morning, and then someone would pick them up in the afternoon. But most nights, if I was home, it was business as usual, cooking dinner, sitting down as a family together, enjoying the evening. And it is the same on the state level as in D.C. votes on Monday afternoon. We wrap up on Thursday, and so members go home.
Yeah.
And that's what I intend to do in Washington, is come back home. I think you should be back here. This is the place that you represent. This is where the constituents are. It's best to be on the ground, engaging with them to find out what's really happening.
Yeah, that was a total shift when I first went up there. When I moved up there to the Washington Bureau in 1990, almost everybody lived there. Almost all the members of the delegation. That's where they lived. That's where their kids went to school. And within like 4 years, there was almost nobody that had. They all just kind of went to renting apartments. And I'm flying back and forth all the time. I think, Lucas was among the first to do that. They had small kids, and they didn't want to move their families to the D.C. area like congressmen in the past had done. So, and since then, that's been the model, is that you fly back and forth all the time.
Yeah, and I think it was great. Pre-COVID, there were at least 2 or 3 flights every day back and forth from D.C. One day I needed to be in DC for an event. I actually flew out that morning and flew home that evening.
Yeah, I've taken that flight too. It's great.
Yeah.
Is that still
now COVID?
Available?
I don't think it is right now. I think unfortunately air travel has been significantly impacted because of COVID. So you don't have any, that I'm aware of, any direct flights to DC. I haven't been to DC since February. So so we'll see, if and when they're able to resume those again. But that does make it a lot more convenient for folks having to go back and forth.
Yeah. So I want to get back to COVID, and today it was announced that there's, we're running out of ICU beds in Oklahoma City. I mean, and had, I think, one of the highest case numbers statewide, since it started. And I was just wondering, I know that you've been kind of you were on the inside on the state part of it, but tell me, like, how I know you said in the primary that you thought the Trump administration had handled it well. I'm not sure I've ever heard you weigh in on how Governor Stitt has handled it, but how has government handled this? I mean, do you think as a whole, do you still think Trump handled it, after he got sick and all those White House people got sick? I mean, we still say that he handled it well? Well,
there's a couple things to, I think, look at here. First of all, it's easy to armchair quarterback, right? You can look back and say, well, we should have done this, we should have done that. And the president, along with Congress, took some immediate action to try to, stem the spread. Certainly, we were short on PPE and other things, which is a supply chain issue, particularly dealing with the Chinese and them, not being willing to send us any of those supplies, and also not being willing to let us go over and really investigate what was happening. I think that exacerbated, the fact that we didn't know a lot about the disease early on. I remember very clearly people talking about, not touching the groceries, having to wash and sanitize everything because you just didn't know.
Right.
And that was pretty common. Now we know a lot more about the disease. Now we know, that it's airborne and it's not necessarily touching things. So we learned a lot. You mentioned the president and some of the staff getting COVID. They had some pretty strict protocols in place at the White House. Everyone was being tested. Everyone was having their temperature checked as they came in the door. Certainly, we now know there must have been some gaps. And we've got to figure out, how do we stem that? On the state level, people are taking precautions as best they can. The most important thing, I think, is we have got to be protecting the most vulnerable. If you look at the statistics across the country, a majority of deaths are happening in that over 55 to 65 population. And oftentimes it's nursing home residents that are being impacted. So we've got to do a better job of making sure that we are focused on those populations, providing every, supply that they need, personal protective equipment and otherwise, to keep everybody, employees and those residents, safe. I think we've done that. Certainly the governor's tried to stockpile PPE to make sure that we're able to give it, to those facilities that do need it. But we've got to really, I think, ramp it up right now and take more personal responsibility in making sure that we're wearing a mask. You and I wore a mask, coming in today. Trying to social distance as best we can when we're in certain situations, and being responsible. That's what this is going to take until we get to the point where we get a vaccine for this. And I think we all recognize that that's going to be really the most effective thing in stemming the COVID-19 spread is getting that vaccine. And the president invested a lot of money with several different pharmaceutical companies to try to get something out quickly. I believe there's now 5 pharma companies that have a vaccine in production or in phase 3 trials that we hope to see in the next 60 to 90 days. And I think that's going to start, hopefully, we'll see.
Will you feel confident about getting one when when whether it's J&J or Moderna, whoever it is? I mean, will you feel okay? I'm ready to.
Yeah, I think these companies, these are not just being vetted by the FDA here in the U.S. They're being vetted internationally by a lot of different countries. And so, yes, I think they will be safe and effective. The way that the process has been sped up, it's actually been a focus for the FDA. So normally when you're putting a drug through the process, it's a much more lengthy process, not because they're testing certain things, but because it just takes a while. This is a focus, and the FDA is putting all their efforts into making sure that we get this drug out as quickly as possible. And it will be safe. Otherwise, it wouldn't be put out in the market.
Right. I want to ask you a little bit about the CARES Act and Congress's role in this in trying to deal with both the health aspect and the economic fallout from it. I know you said that you would have voted for the CARES Act, and you've said now you guys need to use the rest of that Paycheck Protection Program money. That I think is a few billion that is sat there.
184 billion.
What about the unemployment piece of that, which wasn't part of the CARES Act? I think that was actually in a separate bill. The $600 federal benefit that was supplemented the state benefit. Do you think that did you support that? Would you support doing that again?
I think that we should have been utilizing some cost of living parameters or potentially looking at capping it at the maximum salary that you were making whenever you became unemployed, rather than just a flat $600, because you actually ended up paying some people to stay unemployed. But certainly people needed those dollars. They needed to be able to have the resources to take care of their families during this really difficult time. So yes, I would have supported it initially. Now I think we need to reevaluate. In Oklahoma, we've got 5.7% unemployment right now, and 5% is considered full employment. That doesn't mean that there's people that don't need the help. But I think we have to be really thoughtful about when we're approaching this from an unemployment standpoint. If we're paying, for example, the $350 a week on the state level, if we supplement that another couple hundred, and it's putting them at the same salary that they would have had in their previous job, that should probably be the goal, not paying them more to stay home.
Okay. So Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said today that he's willing to make another run at kind of a bare bones type package where, of course, on the House side, you've got a much more expensive package. Other than PPP, what do you think? I mean, direct payments? I mean, what do you think should be an element of any minimal CARES, Relief Act, whatever it's going to be called this time?
Sure. Well, the federal unemployment stimulus supplemental should be part of that conversation. Certainly PPP should be part of that conversation. And here's what I would also offer up, and I think you mentioned it briefly. There's still money sitting out there, and I think that that the Speaker is being grossly negligent and at least not allowing that bill itself to come up for a vote. It's no additional dollars to the taxpayer. It was dollars that are already appropriated that are just sitting there. And there is a pathway to do that, but she's unwilling to even put that up for a vote because she wants to look at funding other things like funding to municipalities, many of which are municipalities or cities that have huge pension liabilities, and they want to use those dollars to fund that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the state and local aid piece. I mean, do you think there's any need for more state and local aid in Oklahoma? There's
still actually dollars out there that haven't been spent on the state and local aid front. So let's utilize those dollars first before we start having these conversations about needing more. At least for Oklahoma, that seems to be the case right now. I do want to make sure that when we are looking at another package, that we're also being mindful of the needs of our schools, because schools have been impacted on two fronts.
Right.
They're not only needing personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies and space, they may need additional space to be able to make sure that kids are social distanced, but they also need connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
And in some areas of the state, even in the 5th District, there are challenges with connectivity. We do not have broadband.
Seminole and Pot County?
Yeah. So we need to be thoughtful.
We should say, I'm sorry to interrupt, that this district, the 5th District that you're running for, includes most of Oklahoma County, but all of Pottawatomie and Seminole County, which is Shawnee and Seminole. I'm
Correct.
sorry.
Nope, that's a great sort of catch there. But I would also say it's not just rural, though.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about Oklahoma City Public Schools and some of those low-income families, they may not have internet access at home. So how are we making sure that those kids are getting a quality education, especially considering that right now OKCPS made the decision to go virtual for the first 9 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of adds a layer for them that they have to overcome. And
Sure.
I think we need to be making sure that they're able to, provide students with either a one-to-one device to be able to work from, or, some sort of program that they are allowed to access to be able to do their homework or continue to learn during this virtual time.
And then obviously most of the education money that came through the federal relief packages went to public schools, but there was a bit of controversy that Governor Stitt directed $10 million of that money to private schools. What was your feeling about that? You guys were out of session. There was nothing, I'm not sure you would have had any say in it anyway. But
we wouldn't have had any say in that, and I think the majority of the dollars did go to public schools, which was the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, the private schools are also impacted by this, and so you have to be thoughtful in that. This is about kids, period. We got to make sure that kids are protected, that kids have access to resources, that teachers that are teaching in those schools have access to resources, PPE and otherwise. And so, he made that decision. It was his to make as the executive of the state, and I think he chose to do that based on the information that he had in front of him.
Probably you might have mixed feelings about the idea of having this new health lab in Stillwater. I know some Oklahoma City members of the legislature aren't that crazy about it, but what's your own feeling about it?
I think I have concerns, and I think that we need to be looking at what's in the best interest of the state. If there is a real fundamental reason for moving that to Stillwater, then it's certainly worthy of a conversation. But I think the concerns that many of my colleagues in the legislature have are that it wasn't a discussion.
I was going to say
it was a unilateral decision.
Was anybody consulted? Any of the Oklahoma City people?
Not that I'm aware of. I wasn't consulted, nor should I be necessarily. But I think it would have been nice to at least have a conversation around the whys, why we feel like this is in the best interest of the state of Oklahoma, what the benefits may be, fiscally or otherwise, because I do know that there's a discussion around cost savings. There's already some infrastructure, I believe, in Stillwater that's set up that would lend itself to having a health lab there. Again, that can play into this, but we really, as legislators, weren't given a lot of information about it before the announcement. And I've had constituents that have reached out to me in the last few days that were employees of the health lab that are pretty shocked.
Yeah.
And so I certainly think a couple of my colleagues are looking at putting forth some legislation that may pump the brakes, if nothing else, to make sure that this potential move is in the best interest of the state.
Yeah, there was no study that any of us know about anyway, but let me shift to healthcare real quick. This is obviously a topic you're used to talking about now. You oppose the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of times that probably wouldn't matter with the Republicans, even when they were in the majority, they weren't able to repeal it, but now you've got it before the Supreme Court again. It's not clear how much of it might fall depending on how they rule, but a good portion of the ACA may fall based on how the Supreme Court acts probably next spring on this. You said that you do want to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And I just have not heard you say how that would be done. Would the government tell insurance companies you have to continue to cover these people?
No, and let me also add, you mentioned the ACA case that's before the Supreme Court
Right.
and the potential repeal, but I think that's also highly speculative.
No,
We
no,
don't
it is.
know what's going to happen.
I think there's a
with
lot, and
that.
that's why the Democrats are focusing so much of their questions on during the Judge Barrett's confirmation hearings on that case, because once you lost Ginsburg, then I think there was maybe, because a lot of some of the previous decisions were 5-4 with Roberts rescuing it for the supporters of it. So that's why you have a lot more concern now about it with Ginsburg
Being off
passing.
the court. But
Yeah.
I would say it's highly speculative
It is
as to
highly
what would happen
speculative.
because we don't know.
Right.
Judge Amy Coney Barrett is a constitutional, lawyer who has an impeccable judicial record and has been lauded by both sides of the aisle, by her colleagues at Notre Dame and by students who had her as a professor. So I think she is well qualified to sit on the court and hear that case.
Yeah, and some things that she said yesterday in her opening statement made me wonder, and I think a lot of people wonder this: why are pieces of legislation like the ACA ever before the Supreme Court? I mean, we all know, that the Supreme Court has been, was Marbury versus Madison. Ever since they've taken the authority to rule on legislation. But if you feel that way, if you don't feel like you should be making policy, that it should be elected officials who make policy, and in this case, elected officials made this policy, and this policy has withstood many attempts to repeal it. Why should the Supreme Court be involved in this again?
Well, because there are pieces of it that people deem unconstitutional. When you're talking about, mandating coverage, it was said early on that's not a tax. Well, I think that you could argue that it is.
Well, Roberts said it was. The majority said that it was.
So that's my point is
Yeah.
that there are pieces of ACA that I do think that could be questionable constitutionally, could be a violation of that. And so that's why you keep seeing this brought up, is because, I think everyone wants to make sure that we're taking care of low-income families that need health care. That's never been the question. The
But
question
you
is,
oppose Medicaid expansion, so that can't be
but,
entirely true.
no, that's actually very true, and I'll explain that
Okay.
in a second. The difference is between my opponent and I is how do you get there? That's the difference. I think that there are a lot of ways that you can utilize things like a health savings account. Instead of providing insurance, let's give an individual a health savings account with an certain amount of dollars in it, and let them spend those dollars on health related.
But if you don't have an insurance policy, I mean, and we've had health savings accounts. I mean, that's something that's been around for a long time, very, very long before, and it's basically where people have a certain amount of their paycheck withheld, mainly to cover those out-of-pocket expenses, but it's usually, kind of a low amount, and currently, under current law, you can't even have one unless you have, I think, a high deductible plan. So I guess what you're talking about is you create a vehicle that's similar to a health savings account that you don't have to have a health insurance plan connected
Correct.
to.
So
but it's
you
still,
could
most
give-
people, low-income people, couldn't save enough to pay for like a really expensive
And
procedure or something.
And that could be a different piece of this, but if you remember, we have hundreds of thousands of Oklahomans that have chronic diseases. And one of the challenges that we have, we're a fairly unhealthy state. Let's get them healthy.
Very unhealthy.
Let's get them healthy. Let's get them to the doctor and start managing their diabetes or their heart conditions or obesity. You start addressing some of those issues, and then these catastrophic types of surgeries or other needs are going to decline. But so to your point, you could offer a large amount of dollars every year for them to be able to choose their doctor. One of the things that the ACA promised was you can keep your doctor. I don't think that's been true. It also said that costs would go down. That didn't happen. I'm paying more now than I ever have before for health care coverage for me and my family, and I have a high deductible. These are the types of challenges, and if you remember,
But let me just ask you on that piece right there, because before there wasn't a requirement that people with pre-existing conditions be covered. So once you put those people in the pool, a lot of them have very expensive, you talked about these chronic conditions, a lot of them are very expensive. So it does drive up the cost for other people, but at least those people are being treated is the theory behind it. But you also have the requirements like you can't have a lifetime cap anymore, and you're talking about somebody with cancer or something who with today's healthcare costs I think they were typically about $1 million for your lifetime. You could reach that. That's that's feasible, fairly. Also, you get to keep your kids on till they're 26. So, those things did make there's no question that it drove up the cost, made deductibles higher, but prescription drug costs have made it higher too.
I'm dealing with that myself.
Yeah.
Let me just make one comment though about sort of the passage of ACA. If you think back to when that was passed, Nancy Pelosi was in charge, and she actually said, we're going to put this bill up for a vote, and it was, I think, 2,000 pages, and people said, wait, we need time to read it. We don't have time for you to read it and examine everything. We just got to get this passed.
This is, people may not remember, but this is when the Senate lost the 2/3 to ward off, filibuster. When Ted Kennedy died and a Republican replaced Ted Kennedy. So they did
You were watching all of this back then. So I think, that I think, it was sort of passed, undercover in the dark of night with not a lot of time to be able to really look at all of the challenges. And a decade later, we're seeing all of the things that have transpired because of ACA. One thing that I commend is that whatever we do, however we move forward with this, it does have to cover pre-existing conditions. You mentioned prescription drug costs. There are thousands of Oklahomans that have a chronic disease. You have to make sure that you're allowing them the medicines that they need to continue to be healthy, because if we have a healthy population, that means people are going to work. They're, contributing back to society. They're being able to pay for their, for a roof over their head and food and for their family. These are good things for all of us. So I want
theoretically health insurance costs could come down then. Too.
There you go.
Yeah.
And you've seen companies across Oklahoma City, and probably others, offering incentives for people to actually go, to the gym 3 times a week and make sure that they're getting, their cholesterol checked to keep their healthcare costs down. I do want to maybe take a step back though, and you talked about Medicaid expansion. You mentioned that I wasn't for that. I want to be very clear about my position on that because I don't want it to be misconstrued. I was against putting it in the Constitution. That was my issue with it. I think that my fear is that the federal government, as they have done with other types of federal programs, No Child Left Behind being an education initiative, they've given us the directives. They control the purse strings. They control how we spend the money. And right now, there's a 90% federal match with a 10% state match. My fear, Chris, is that that'll change in the future. And if it goes to 70-30 or 60-40, we have no flexibility in how to change the program because it's in the Constitution now. And
so are you saying that if it had been a statutory question, you would have supported it?
I did. If you looked at Governor Stitt's Medicaid expansion plan back in the legislative session, I did support that. Now, he wanted to do some different things, using some block grants or trying to provide flexibility.
Yeah, that was a very specific type of plan, but go ahead.
But yes, I mean, that to me made sense. That was a step in the right direction, and I did support that. So I just want to make sure that there's some clarity on that because I don't want it to be misconstrued.
Okay. I don't want to run out of time before I ask you about some other things, and that first one being climate change. And what you think, just 2 or 3 different steps that you think, well, let me just ask if you think the U.S. is doing everything it can now to reduce emissions. And of course, global warming is global. It's not just, but the U.S. does have a responsibility. It's one of the top carbon producing countries. I mean, is it doing everything now? If not, what else could it do? And let me just stop there. Okay.
So I think the science, says that climate change is real. We have done, I think, a tremendous job of trying to ensure that we're doing our part in the world to address, the environment. And the pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, what most people don't realize is that the United States was sort of beholden to this accord, and there are other countries that really weren't meeting the same requirements. So countries like China, India, who have tremendous carbon output. Why are we being held to a higher standard and we're trying to meet those needs when other countries aren't? That doesn't mean I don't think that we shouldn't be mindful of the environment. We absolutely should. But I think that we as a country are using free market principles and innovation and technology to really make sure that that happens. 15 years ago, there were very few electric vehicles on the road.
Right.
Now, 2 years ago, during the Super Bowl advertisements, almost every car company said they were going to a hybrid model or some sort of EV platform.
I see quite a few Teslas around here.
There's been quite a, you see quite a few of those. So that's the kind of thing I want to see. We're being mindful, we're being thoughtful about the environment, but we're also using innovation and technology to really push that forward. You've even seen things like an expansion of solar and wind energy across the state of Oklahoma. That's been very well received because we're able to to lower energy costs for not only Oklahomans but across the country when we're selling that power.
So obviously only a certain amount of government mandates do have a role, but the market really
should dictate.
Yeah, well, the market has, I think, to some extent driven this. I mean, some of the big companies that build their server farms do it only with they power them through renewables and everything, but
so that's, I think, is talking through that. Why would you want to put government mandates in place? And that's what Democrats want to often talk about. And a great example of that is California. And Gavin Newsom saying, I don't want any fossil fuel vehicles, by 2035.
And they have rolling blackouts.
And they have rolling blackouts and energy, costs that are through the roof. That doesn't make any sense. You're already seeing, EV vehicles, make a presence in their communities, but to mandate that is a complete 180 from what we should be doing.
So what will your approach be to the fossil fuel industry, to the oil and gas production industry in Congress? I mean, if there will be amendments, there are every year on the Interior Spending Bill about drilling, and actually the president himself a few weeks ago banned drilling off the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast. Off of Florida, where his new home state. What do you say about that? I mean, there's a lot of discussion in this race about some votes that Congressman Horn took about banning offshore drilling. What's your position on offshore drilling?
Well, I think that we should be mindful again of the environment, but let's be clear. We spent decades trying to become energy independent in this country. There was a big push for that for a variety of reasons, whether that's national security, whether that's making sure that our industries are, we still use a lot of fossil fuel products, petroleum products, across the globe. Banning drilling and exploration becomes problematic because what's going to happen at some point is you're going to start being reliant on foreign oil again. And I think that's where there's a real difference in my position in this race and my opponent. Her predecessors, Democrat predecessors, actually supported drilling off of the coast and as well as drilling in Anwar. I think it's difficult to say that you're for an industry when you voted against them every single time.
What about the argument that the offshore drillers are just multinationals now, that it's not like Oklahoma City's and Oklahoma itself are home to a lot of independents that are now really involved in, mostly drilling in shale formations in the United States. Does it matter to you whether they're home state companies or not?
Well, I mean, it impacts the energy industry regardless of whether they are based here in Oklahoma City or they're based outside, because it goes back to the ability for us to continue to be energy independent regardless of the company.
I want to switch to taxes. As last week, the Congresswoman had a plan that she proposed to reverse the tax breaks for those making over $400,000. To increase what's called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is for what they call the working poor. People that who work but don't make much get a refundable credit when they file. you voted for a tax package to kind of stem the bleeding of education and provide a teacher pay raise.
Two teacher pay raises.
Two teacher pay raises, one this year, right? And
one in 2018 for
okay.
6,000 and one in
Right.
2019 for an additional 1,200. Yeah.
Are there any circumstances that you can see yourself voting for a tax package in Congress? I mean, even if it were, most of it was just to address the deficit, address the yearly deficits that are reaching $1 trillion.
I think there's better ways to do that. Certainly, the difference between the federal government and the state government is that we have a balanced budget.
Mm-hmm.
You can't spend what you don't have. And that's
not counting bond issues.
Not counting bond issues. Those are local, typically municipal, types of things.
There are state bonds.
There are state bonds,
yeah.
but for the most part, you can't spend what you don't have.
Right.
And that's why the revenue that was generated in 2018 was important, because we had my first couple of years in the state Senate, it was a $600 million budget shortfall, followed by a $900 billion budget shortfall. Actually, I think it was 1.2 the second year, 1.2 billion, and then a $900 million the third year. And we kept, we couldn't keep pace, and we also have a cap on our rainy day fund, and that's a constitutional cap. So we had exhausted the rainy day fund, and we were unable to really make sure that we were funding core services to the level that I felt it needed to be. On the federal level, it's a very different conversation, though, because we have unlimited spending. There's no balanced budget amendment. There's no cap on that. So I think there are ways to look at trying to reduce expenses, still paying for core services, but I think it can be done. It's just going to take a lot of work. Look, I've had to take some tough votes in the legislature. You've seen the attack ads on me from Club for Growth because of a lot of those votes. It's not easy, but I think it's necessary. We can't continue to pile on to this deficit.
I was going to say, Republicans seem to, they're more serious about that under Democratic presidents, and then when you have a Republican president and Republican Congress that's piling them up, you don't hear that much about it. But,
I haven't served.
I know you haven't.
So I've only served on the state level, and that state level has always been a balanced budget, and I think that's the way that we should operate.
Langford talks about it, and obviously Coburn, if Senator Coburn were still in there, it would be every day. Yeah. But really, they just kind of forget about that.
Well, right now I think we're under unique circumstances. Sure. This is a difficult situation, and we've got to continue to make sure our economy is turning along, especially with continuation of COVID. We talked about the CARES package originally. I think there needs to be, we need to take a look at what else we need to be doing to keep the economy going. But this is unsustainable for the long term, and you've got to really start making some tough decisions.
Well, just to finish this up, I mean, is there an argument that the wealth gap to some extent is kind of exacerbated by the tax code?
I don't know if I would say that that's a piece of it. I think there's a lot of pieces. It's also a very complicated tax code.
No, it is, but I think the example a lot of people would use is like the Warren Buffett example. I pay a lower tax rate than my secretary because all of his income is capital gains income. Investment income, I should say. Well, his secretary, it's income, which is taxed at a higher rate. I mean, is that desirable?
I'd have to do some deep dive to figure out what makes sense. So I don't know that I have a answer one way or another on that.
Understood. I want to speed through a couple more topics and let you go. Local policing or policing. I know that's mostly a local issue, how citizens want to spend their local tax money and how they want their local police department to keep them safe. Is there anything at the federal level and I'm sure these images are burned into all of our minds, is there anything that you think Congress, the national legislature should do?
It is a local issue, and I think that that Congress could look at additional funding. There's been this notion to defund the police, and I think if you talk to citizens, that's not at all what they're interested in.
But what about the question of qualified immunity? I mean,
well, my opponent actually voted to take that away.
Right.
You know, I think that's one of the reasons why the state, federal, or the Fraternal Order of Police, over 6,000 law enforcement officers endorsed me in this race, because they felt like, you know, taking that away jeopardized them and their families.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very honored and proud to have that. Here's the thing that I think we need to think through. Certainly, there are bad apples in every profession, whether it's, you know, medicine, teaching, you know, legal profession, police,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to be, if they have committed a crime, they have to be, you know, held to the letter of the law on that. But we can't defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
That's a notion that I don't subscribe to at all.
And probably few do. I mean, there's not really.
But you saw it in Norman.
Yeah,
I mean, that was pretty.
Yeah, that's true. Down the road, they did choose to.
And I will say this. I was actually walking my neighborhood a couple of months ago, and one of my neighbors is a 37-year veteran of law enforcement. And I stopped and I said, you know, sir, I want you to know how much I appreciate your, you know, commitment to our community. He is African American.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it's really difficult for him to see this notion that people don't like the police. He said, I've committed my life to making sure that I protect my community. Doesn't matter what your skin color is. Shouldn't matter what my skin color is. But there's this notion that plays into it somehow. And he said, I'm just trying to do my job here.
Surely he has some understanding of why, you know, after what we've seen after years and years, of why some people might distrust him in some neighborhoods.
You know, certainly, but I think that can be addressed if we have more training.
Mm-hmm.
He shared with me that he's been a part of this particular law enforcement community for over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'm blessed because our division actually does at minimum quarterly training to address things like, you know, de-escalation tactics, or how to deal with issues in the field as it relates to mental health or substance abuse or those sorts of things. He said there are communities out there that they don't get any additional training.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're very limited on funds. The other thing is body cams. People don't realize that the body cams are not cheap, and when you're having to outfit every officer 24/7 and keep that video on file for months and years at a time, it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's protection for the officer, but also the individual that's, you know, involved in that particular situation.
Right.
Those are the things that we should be thinking about as we talk about making sure that we're protecting our communities. Do we have some racial divides? Yes. Should we be having some really tough conversations about race? You bet we should. I think that needs to continue. That work, you know, has started, but we've got a long way to go, and I want to see that happen. But that doesn't mean that we should just walk away from an entire, you know, public safety entity because we're upset with what's happened. We've got to address it head on.
The president endorsed you Sunday night by tweet, I guess. Not a surprise. It looked like he was doing a whole list of them. Does that help you or hurt you in the 5th District of Oklahoma?
You know, I think the president, you know, won this district by 13% in 2016. You know, I think he wants to see Republicans take over the House and take the gavel away from Pelosi, who I think many of us believe is very partisan in these last, you know, couple of years, and try to actually get stuff done.
Senator, thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming in. Second debate tomorrow night, October 14th.
Correct.
I think.
Yeah.
And one more after that, right?
On the 20th, Fox 25.
Okay.
Yep. So.
And thanks so much for watching Conversations with Candidates on oklahoman.com. Again, tomorrow, Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Abby Broyles. On Thursday, U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe. These interviews, the one with Senator Bice, will be available online on our website and on our YouTube site, as well as all the others. Thanks so much.